Timaeos. Persons of the dialogue. Socrates, Critias, Timaeos, Hermocrates. Says Socrates, 1, 2, 3, but where, my dear Timaeos, is the fourth of those who were yesterday my guests and are to be my entertainers today? Says Timaeos, he has been taken ill, Socrates, for he would not willingly have been absent from this gathering. Says Socrates, then, if he is not coming, you and the two others must supply his place. Says Timaeos, certainly, and we will do all that we can, having been handsomely entertained by you yesterday. Those of us who remain should be only too glad to return your hospitality. Says Socrates, do you remember what were the points of which I required you to speak? Says Timaeos, we remember some of them, and you will be here to remind us of anything which we have forgotten, or rather, if we are not troubling you, will you briefly recapitulate the whole, and then the particulars will be more firmly fixed in our memories? Says Socrates, to be sure I will. The chief theme of my yesterday's discourse was the state, how constituted and of what citizens composed it would seem likely to be most perfect. Says Timaeus, yes, Socrates, and what you said of it was very much to our mind. Says Socrates, did we not begin by separating the husbandmen and the artisans from the class of defenders of the state? Says Timaeus, yes. Says Socrates, and when we had given to each one that single employment and particular art which was suited to his nature, we spoke of those who were intended to be our warriors, and said that they were to be guardians of the city against attacks from within as well as from without, and to have no other employment. They were to be merciful in judging their subjects, of whom they were by nature friends, but fierce to their enemies when they came across them in battle. Says Timaeus, exactly. Says Socrates, we said, if I am not mistaken, that the guardians should be gifted with a temperament in a high degree both passionate and philosophical, and that then they would be as they ought to be, gentle to their friends and fierce with their enemies. Says Timaeus, certainly. Says Socrates, and what did we say of their education? Were they not to be trained in gymnastic and music, and all other sorts of knowledge which were proper for them? Says Timaeus, very true. Says Socrates, and being thus trained, they were not to consider gold or silver or anything else to be their own private property. They were to be like hired troops, receiving pay for keeping guard from those who were protected by them. The pay was to be no more than would suffice for men of simple life, and they were to spend in common, and to live together in the continual practice of virtue, which was to be their sole pursuit. Says Timaeus, that was also said. Says Socrates, neither did we forget the women, of whom we declared that their natures should be assimilated and brought into harmony with those of the men, and that the common pursuits should be assigned to them both in time of war and in their ordinary life. Says Timaeus, that, again, was as you say. Says Socrates, and what about the procreation of children? Or rather, was not the proposal too singular to be forgotten? For all wives and children were to be in common, to the intent that no one should ever know his own child, but they were to imagine that they were all one family. Those who were within a suitable limit of age were to be brothers and sisters, those who were of an elder generation parents and grandparents, and those of a younger children and grandchildren. Says Timaeus, yes, and the proposal is easy to remember, as you say. Says Socrates, and do you also remember how, with a view of securing as far as we could the best breed, we said that the chief magistrates, male and female, should contrive secretly, by the use of certain lots, so to arrange the nuptial meeting, that the bad of either sex and the good of either sex might pair with their like, and there was to be no quarrelling on this account, for they would imagine that the union was a mere accident, and was attributed to the lot? Says Timaeus, I remember. Says Socrates, and you remember how we said that the children of the good parents were to be educated, and the children of the bad secretly dispersed among the inferior citizens, and while they were all growing up the rulers were to be on the lookout, and to bring up from below in turn those who were worthy, and those among themselves who were unworthy were to take the places of those who came up? Says Timaeus, true. Says Socrates, then have I now given you all the heads of our yesterday's discussion, or is there anything more, my dear Timaeus, which has been omitted? Says Timaeus, nothing, Socrates, it was just as you have said. Says Socrates, I should like, before proceeding further, to tell you how I feel about the state which we have described. I might compare myself to a person who, on beholding beautiful animals, either created by the painter's art, or, better still, alive but at rest, is seized with a desire of seeing them in motion, or engaged in some struggle or conflict to which their forms appear suited. This is my feeling about the state which we have been describing. There are conflicts which all cities undergo, and I should like to hear someone tell of our own city carrying on a struggle against her neighbors, and how she went out to war in a becoming manner, and when at war showed by the greatness of her actions and the magnanimity of her words in dealing with other cities a result worthy of her training and education. Now I, Critias and Hermocrates, am conscious that I myself should never be able to celebrate the city and her citizens in a befitting manner, and I am not surprised at my own incapacity. To me the wonder is rather that the poets present as well as past are no better, not that I mean to depreciate them, but every one can see that they are a tribe of imitators, and will imitate best and most easily the life in which they have been brought up. And while that which is beyond the range of man's education he finds hard to carry out in action, and still harder adequately to represent in language, I am aware that the sophists have plenty of brave words and fair conceits, but I am afraid that being only wanderers from one city to another, and having never had habitations of their own, they may fail in their conception of philosophers and statesmen, and may not know what they do and say in time of war, when they are fighting or holding parley with their enemies. And thus people of your class are the only ones remaining who are fitted by nature and education to take part at once both in politics and philosophy. Here is Timaeus of Locri in Italy, a city which has admirable laws, and who is himself in wealth and rank the equal of any of his fellow citizens. He has held the most important and honorable offices in his own state, and, as I believe, has scaled the heights of all philosophy. And here is Critias, whom every Athenian knows to be no novice in the matters of which we are speaking. And as to Hermocrates, I am assured by many witnesses that his genius and education qualify him to take part in any speculation of the kind. And therefore yesterday, when I saw that you wanted me to describe the formation of the state, I readily assented, being very well aware that if you only would, none were better qualified to carry the discussion further, and that when you had engaged our city in a suitable war, You of all men living could best exhibit her playing a fitting part. When I had completed my task, I, in return, imposed this other task upon you. You conferred together and agreed to entertain me today, as I had entertained you, with a feast of discourse. Here am I in festive array, and no man can be more ready for the promised banquet.